Welcome, guys, back to the I Love Wrestling podcast. I'm your host, as always, Justin Wright. Today, we are welcome with the infamous Bobby Fish. How we doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. I am doing really well. We are experiencing a little cold spell here in Florida, but cold spell in Florida. Come on, it's not like your neck of the woods.
No, up here in Chicago, it gets chilly. I'm sure down
Yeah,
there, your chili and my chili are two different things.
yeah. Well, I grew up in upstate New York, so I understand the cold, but haven't been here now for what are we looking at? 8 years. Yeah, I don't have the thick skin anymore. I think you lose it.
It happens. I know I'm
Yeah.
from West Virginia originally.
Uh-huh.
Growing the thick skin, I think, takes just as long to get it as it is to get rid of it. So I
It would
understand completely.
make it would make sense from an evolutionary speaking standard, I suppose. So
Definitely. Before I get into questions about your career or wrestling itself,
yes,
something that
sir.
really fascinated me, Bobby, was your journey with DDPY. I noticed
Mm.
you've put a lot of effort and work into sharing your journey with us. Um, what made you start DDPY, and kind of what transformations have you noticed since you began that journey?
Okay. First thing was, I mean, Dallas at one point had gifted it to like every pro wrestler in existence, like whether you were on TV or not. Like, so a lot of people had it, and it's just, you know, inexorbitantly generous of him. However, there is something real to the idea that like you got to have skin in the game sometimes. And so when I was doing CrossFit, there was a thing called ROMWAD, which CrossFit was what really got me tuned into like, wow, I need better mobility. Like I've neglected stretching and stuff outside of martial arts. So like when I did martial arts, I always kind of maintained a flexible lower body, but I had gotten pretty muscle bound in my upper body. And so Ramwad got me doing some of these mobility things. And then after like enough time, I was like, wait a second, I have DDP yoga. And it was gifted to me by the man. He was that general. Like, what am I doing? So I started doing DDP yoga instead of Ramwad. And then when it really kicked up was I tore my ACL when I was in NXT. And that was early in my run there. So I had moved from New York to Florida. I didn't know anybody but people at work. And I wasn't going to work anymore. So I was just stuck in a one-bedroom apartment in Orlando. And I had the app, and Dallas, one of Dallas's things is he meets you, DDP Yoga meets you where you are. And I was like, okay, well, I'm stuck in a bed right now because I'm recovering. And so that's where it met me because they have a bed series and a chair series and then a stand series where you're like learning to stand up out of the chair. So I went through all of that just to, break the monotony of what my life was for those few months. And what I found by the end of when I was starting to get back into training and stuff was that, wow, I feel better. And, long story short, I've not stopped doing DDP yoga since.
Okay.
And I like right now I'm up to I think day 102 or no 103 in a row, and I've it's something you can do every single day. Some
It,
workouts are more strenuous than others, but like yeah, it truly is just such a game changer.
something that else you do is you partake in training and coaching at like House of Champions. Is it
Yes, sir.
something that you recommend to students and stuff to get involved with?
Yeah, so I do the strength and conditioning at HOC as well, and every strength and conditioning session, which is before class every night. We do 10 minutes of DDP yoga to start strength and conditioning. And then we go through like whatever it is that I've designed for the day. And then we finish with 10 minutes of DDP yoga. And part of the whole concept is that we're done in an hour. So I try to hit them with mobility in the front and then strength and conditioning in between. The conditioning can range from a few different things, and then close out with DDP yoga, more mobility, and be done in an hour so that the members can focus on the pro wrestling training,
Okay.
because that's what they're there to make the priority, right? But I know, like, when I was coming up, you still had to make sure that you're going to get your gym time and everything in, and it's a full schedule. So when it came to strength and conditioning, I was like, yeah, let's get it done in an hour. And I knew part of that had to be DDP yoga.
Okay. When did you start working with House of Champions? And is training and coaching like something that you look forward to doing for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think that's I never thought I'd come to this conclusion where I'd be like, okay, well, I see that I have I have more value, I think, to the industry coaching and producing at this point, because there's so much that we take for granted as performers, because we're around each other, so we all know the same stuff. Um, but it's not until you're around people that are in different parts of their career, coming up, where you realize, like, wow, some of this stuff is not either A, known, or B, being passed down. And I look at how fortunate I was in my career to be under the learning tree that was, let's say, like a William Regal or Triple H or Fit Finley. And who am I to bogart that knowledge? It's for me to pass down. That's the tradition. So I think this is my new, not new, but yeah, I think this is my lane 100%.
Okay. Something on the channel that has always drawn me is the story of how you guys have found wrestling, or how you've fallen in love with wrestling, pun intended, I guess. When
Mm.
did you find it, and when did you fall in love with it?
I found it super young. I was probably 8 or 9, and
Okay.
I remember one of my first memories was Jimmy Snuka coming off the top of the cage onto Don Morocco. I believe it was at Madison Square Garden, and Jimmy Snuka was bleeding buckets. I remember where I was. I was on my Aunt Kathy and my Uncle Mike's living room floor. It was a family gathering, and I was like, what is this? And then my earlier memories from then would have been just, watching it with my dad and like talking to my dad about it. My brother and I had an older brother. We were huge British Bulldog fans. I loved Ricky Steamboat. Those were like the early ones that captivated me. Obviously, you know, everybody about my age was a Hulkamaniac in some way. So yeah, those are probably my earliest memories. And I don't know that I fell in love with it. What I was in love with was football. My
Okay.
brother and I both played football, and that was that was my world growing up, from probably 9 to my early 20s. And then but wrestling was always there. It was always kind of on the periphery, and I went, in high school there was definitely some time in there where I probably faded away from it. It wasn't the, you know, easiest way to get dates to watch wrestling. um I think a lot of people go through that phase, but it always seemed to be in the background. And it was definitely something that my dad and I bonded over, which was huge. And I think that always kind of kept me coming back. And yeah, eventually I had to fall in love with it. NWA, the Crockett years, like late 80s, early 90s. So we're talking like
Okay.
Sting, Surfer Sting,
Yes.
Luger as the total package, the Horsemen, Barry Windham, obviously the Road Warriors. I mentioned the Horsemen, but like I realize now looking back, you know, I thought I liked all these tag teams, and the truth of the matter is I like Tully and Arn, but I didn't see it as that. I thought like, oh, I like Fantastics are great. Oh, Rock and Rolls are great. When in actuality, what I really appreciated was Arn and Tully. Um, but yeah, so I think to answer your question, I would say NWA, the Crockett years, late 80s, early 90s is what made me fall in love with pro wrestling. I was into it big time, but I went hook, line, and sinker on that stuff. Like seeing the WarGames for the first time. Dusty Rhodes was captivating, just captivating, and all of that. Sting, I had such a love for Sting, and then it was the feud with him and Muta that introduced me to Muta, and I would say like Muta's probably the guy that had the biggest influence on me overall. I
Okay.
loved the great Muta.
I've I haven't heard that a lot. I think you're only the second guy I've had on the podcast out of about 100 now to even bring up the Great Moda. That's
Yeah, he
that's
was
crazy.
just part of it was, and again, my age, I'm 48, so we're going way back. But there was a wrestler by the name of the Great Kabuki who
Yep.
used to wrestle on World Class, and that I used to get after school at whatever time on ESPN in upstate New York in Albany. And he was the first one I saw use the mist, and he had long hair that covered his face, and he had his face painted, but you couldn't really tell because the hair was so long. But he was the gimmick would have been that he was some kind of a ninja, and maybe in a martial artist. Like I don't remember the time frame exactly, but ninjas were the thing when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I was a ninja for Halloween maybe 7 years in a row. You just could not get that costume off me. And so when I saw Muda for the first time, and it was definitely against Sting, um, I was like, and I think they may have gimmicked it a little bit and said that he was the son of the great Kabuki. So I was like, oh man, this is, you know, and it certainly wouldn't be the first time that they told a little bit of a lie in pro
Yeah.
wrestling. Um, but then just watching Muda, the way the man moved was just so distinct and so athletic and so like I said, I played football, so I could appreciate like athleticism, and Sting was athletic. Um, and then Muda was another level of athletic. So yeah, I think that's when I really fell in love with it.
Okay. You brought up a couple matches that drew you in, captivated you. You've
Mm,
had quite a few yourself. Um, I'm gonna name off four of them, and I just want to know what these four matches have meant to you.
okay.
Just give me a short, brief explanation of what they mean to you.
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna start with the very first of all. You got to face one of your best friends, Kyle O'Reilly. What was
Yes.
that like?
Well, so that's going way, way back. Were we talking like one of the first times? Because I don't know that we've wrestled other than in those like against each other. Um,
I was Evolve 1 2009, so it
yes,
was an
yeah,
early
yeah,
one,
that's what I was talking
early.
about. So we wrestled in the first Evolve and then another one in there. And at that time, Kyle and I's relationship was completely different. We were friendly, of course,
Okay.
but we really didn't know each other that well. You know, he was in Canada and started to, get more stateside, but he was in St. Louis. So, we would run into each other and we knew each other. We actually met, I think we had met for the first time at a Harley race camp.
Okay.
Um, I think at that time I had already started working for Noah as a result of the camp that I went to. And they started bringing me back to like help out with the camp, and that's where Kyle and I first met. And then years later we would cross paths doing the indies and stuff. And then Gabe Sapolsky had the idea for Evolve, and he had a concept for it being very martial arts influenced. This was before MMA had exploded, but it was on the radar enough to where people were starting to see it more legitimately within pro wrestling. And Kyle and I definitely shared that love of pro wrestling and martial arts. So, Gabe had his idea, and he wanted us to be the first match ever in Evolve, which he had a big ideas for it and big plans. So, I mean, I was humbled and honored to do it. And yeah, Kyle was a perfect opponent.
I'm gonna jump forward a little bit, but you got to face at War of Worlds 2015 for the Ring of Honor World Title. You took on Jay Briscoe. Um, Looking back on that, what did that match mean to you?
Um, it was, Tony DeVito was the man that trained me, and Tony was Ring of Honor when Gabe was just getting Ring of Honor like established, and it was like that was the indie darling was Ring of Honor. So Mark and Jay Briscoe, they were there from the beginning
Day
as far
one.
as Ring of Honor, the Ring of Honor that I knew, and here I was watching them. I was younger in the business, but older in age. So I had always, anytime we would cross paths and speak to one another, it was always pleasant, but they didn't really know me, and nor should they have at that point. When I started to get some traction going, it was mostly in Japan because it was for Noah. And so knowing the Briscoes for all those years and knowing how good they were, and just to me, I hate to bring up the football background again, but like I would watch a Briscoes match and it looked like a football game, you know. Jay had a first step that was just quicker than other people, and
Yes.
an impact that was there, and same with Mark, you know. And when I got into pro wrestling, I wanted to continue being physical. I wanted to play football. To be honest, I wanted to continue playing football. To be honest, I went to college really to play more football, but at the same time, I knew I probably wasn't going to be able to support myself playing professional, and I turned out that I didn't make any of the professional. Like I tried out for a couple of arena teams and it didn't work out. So um, the matches with Jay and Mark, they felt like a football game. And that was why I signed up for pro wrestling, and why I got into it was because I wanted to feel that way. I wanted there to be wanted it to be snug. Let's just put it that way, I suppose.
Okay. Excuse me. before your departure from Ring of Honor, you got to also take on for the Ring of Honor World Title Adam Cole at Manhattan Mayhem. Was that a special moment for the two of you guys who, would later go on to be connected?
For sure. Neither one of us had any idea what the future would hold, so we didn't know that at the time. And to be honest, that match, and then even it kind of takes me back to the match with Jay. Was the match with Jay? I knew was on the schedule, but at that time, we were coming off of the reDRagon stuff. I was pretty much, a tag guy. I don't know that the company or anyone else, saw me. I was singles prior to that, but I don't know that let's just put it this way. I didn't think they had plans for me. And my whole goal going into the match with Jay Briscoe was to make enough noise and taunt him and call him a hick and all that stuff just to try to get some buzz around the match enough to where it seemed like he might beat him. And I feel like we did that. I feel like I was able to pull that off. A friend of mine was helping me with a lot of the um, like guerrilla style stuff that we were doing on our own. And I feel like the people in that ECW arena, at least for a moment, thought that they might see a title change. And that was kind of the same thing I wanted to create with the match against Cole, because it was Manhattan Mayhem, I think.
Yep,
Yeah.
2017 Manhattan Mayhem.
Yeah, and that's like that was the Ring of Honor, end of most of the storylines and whatnot. So it was like, okay, let's see what kind of buzz I can get going to make it seem like this could happen. And again, there was a lot of stuff at the end of that match. The Dudley or Bubba Ray, and there was stuff happening that was going to further the company's direction. So I think that the match itself got kind of overshadowed, which wasn't the greatest thing in the world, but the match itself I really enjoyed and thought it was really good. I thought Adam and I played. He was such a smarmy heel at the time, and I think I had some momentum. I think that people for the first time were starting to, be like, "Yeah, this Bobby Fish guy, weird name, but not too bad."
Was it tough departing from Ring of Honor, being there for so many years?
It was. I wasn't excited necessarily about leaving, but I was excited about what was next. And if I'm being honest, like when it came to re-signing, we weren't really close on the numbers. And so I was entertaining the idea of signing a bigger contract with New Japan and a lesser contract with Ring of Honor, because for the previous few years, that's kind of what we had going, because Kyle and I started working for New Japan around that time. Not that time, but like 2 years prior. And I had so much experience in Japan, and New Japan seemed pretty happy with us. So it was like, okay, it just made sense to do more time overseas. At the time I had not met my wife yet and I wasn't married, but it made more sense to maybe do more time in Japan and less time here, because just the money was better. So,
You mentioned New Japan, you've mentioned Noah. You've been fortunate enough to be able to wrestle inside the Tokyo Dome. Is that a venue that, like, growing up or watching wrestling, you ever thought you'd be able to get inside? And what was your feeling like being able to compete in that historic building?
there's good reason why New Japan runs it every year, and it's their year-end show. The Dome is it'll always be kind of special. And being a foreigner, like I didn't really know, you'd heard of the Tokyo Dome before, but to know just some of the history that's happened in that building, um, there's just something historic about, like, there's just a vibe to the place. So to be able to perform there once would have been, a box to check. But to have been able to perform there numerous times was pretty damn cool.
Um, we brought up Kyle O'Reilly a couple times.
Yes, sir.
How did you guys go about joining forces to create reDRagon, and where'd you get the name reDRagon from?
um so I'm trying to prop this up better
You're good.
without my hand being in the way. um to be honest, it was Hunter Johnson,
Okay,
Delirious, who
cool.
had the idea. I'm not sure if these ideas came together or if he was like, "Oh, these guys would be a hell of a tag team." Like, so we can do this with them, or if it was to, it just the primary reason might have been to get Eddie and Davey back together as a tag team to give them a reason. And that, Kyle and I having such chemistry might have been a happy accident. But I don't think so. I think that I just give Hunt more credit than that. He was a good booker, and he knew what he was doing, and he booked things way in advance. He was on top of stuff. So um, that's kind of what brought Kyle and I together was Eddie and Davey weren't really tagging anymore, I don't think. And Davey was doing his single stuff, and I think it was with the world title and Ring of Honor. And Kyle was, because he was trained by Davey and Tony Fazina, um, was a natural like link there. But they were trying to turn Kyle heel and give a reason for Eddie and Davey to need one another again to come back together as the American Wolves, who they were super over and getting a lot of attention at that time, even from the bigger TV companies at the time, because Ring of Honor was TV but smaller at in those days. Um, and it just that was the vehicle to give me something to do, and to give Kyle a direction, and dare I say, like, we filled each other's gaps. Like, I think Kyle and I were both pretty well established performers in our own right, but I think there were probably some things that he needed work on, and probably some things I needed to work on, and we had no idea that us coming together would be the missing piece. But I think our career trajectories, prove that they kind of confirm that that's exactly what it was. So we have a huge debt of gratitude to always, I will always pay that back to Hunter Johnson for seeing that in us, and then trusting us the way that he did.
One of my favorite aspects about your and Kyle's like tag team tandem was your finish, the high low. Um, is that something that you guys took any inspiration on from the Eliminators in ECW?
So we in Ring of Honor, our finish was chasing the dragon, which was Kyle took him up for take somebody up for a brain buster, and I would head kick him, and we would drop him, hit the brain buster. When we went to WWE, just thinking that, like, okay, we're gonna be wrestling guys our size and guys much bigger than us. What's something we can do to everyone? And chasing the dragon was not that type of thing. So we did take inspiration from Total Elimination for sure. That was one of the things that somebody had suggested, and then Kyle had, he could do that leg sweep. That was already a part of something that he liked to use, and I was doing the jumping knee, which later we would kind of have a version with the head kick as well. But The jumping knee is probably the original, and that one, yeah, we could hit it on everyone,
Anybody. Yeah.
and we could do it out of nowhere. It really, I could not imagine our run in WWE as the Undisputed Era without that as our finish. Like there's so many moments where that was clutch. Um, and we used Chasing the Dragon a few times in WWE, but yeah, just that was the finish we needed.
Speaking of the Undisputed Era, you guys had quite the debut. Um, after two very important matches, you guys jumped the tag team champions. You jumped the NXT champion. You know, what did that moment or those moments mean to yourself, Kyle and Adam?
Um, it was like just confirmation that like we can be here.
Mm-hmm.
We can be a like a big part of this company. Like I know before we hit the Barclay Center, and Kyle and I were in our spot waiting for our cue, and we're looking at each other, quiet, just kind of waiting. And I don't know exactly what he was thinking, but I know that I was thinking, like, are they going to even know who the hell we are? And we got our cue and we went out, and the whole, like, you could feel a little bit of a buzz as we were going through the arena to get to the ring, because some people were noticing. And as I felt that buzz start to build, we're not we're not big guys at all, so it's not like Drew McIntyre you're gonna spot right away, right?
Yeah.
Or us, and we had t-shirts on, and we were being kind of covered to get where we needed to get. But you could still feel it a little bit, and in some way I think that it gave me confidence, and that confidence started to build the closer we got to the ring before we were going to take our opportunity. And then when we did, it happened real fast, so I'm not sure how conscious I was of all of it, but it seemed like they were there for it, the fans, and it felt good. EY and Axel being or Wolfie being the ones that we jumped, they were great, and they were there for everything, and it went really, really well. And I think when we came back, Kyle and I, the anxiety was gone, because it was like, okay, yeah, that that worked. They knew who we were. So um obviously the it going over like a fart in church was the concern, and
Yeah.
that didn't happen. Um but if I'm being honest, it wasn't until the second part. And I have a feeling that that's your next question. So I'll let you ask the next question, and then we'll see where we go with the answer.
But my next question, I was actually going to move on to WarGames. So, I
Okay.
mean, if you want to elaborate, go
Yeah.
ahead. Go
Well,
ahead.
then I'll go back to it wasn't until we did the run in with Adam at the end on Drew that we knew, like, okay, they know who we are. But it really wasn't until we did the whole deal, and then we went up the rampway, back up the stage, and Adam hit Adam Cole baby at the top of the stage. And I think maybe seeing our three faces all together on the Titantron, and Adam's arms up overhead, and the whole arena repeating it back to him, it was like, okay, they know exactly who we are. And
Was
I
that
think,
kind of like what lets you know that you guys truly did shock the system?
yeah, I think so, because it was like they not only they know who we are, but like we are supposed to be here. And even, the deal with WWE was always like, it's the land of the, the big men, and if you're not over 6 foot, like, you can't get over. And there's not one of us, even in the four, the quartet, that's over 6 foot. But I think that also, the way that they presented us was brilliant, in that, like, we could be threatening to anybody. We were a danger to anybody, not necessarily because we were over 6 foot, but because we were technical as all hell, every one of us, and there was four of us, and we had no problem with outnumbering you. Like, in
Yep,
fact, that's what we tried to do.
that's what
And
you
again,
did best.
yeah, and again, that's kind of why I love that high-low finish too, because it's front and back, and it's opposite sides. It just was the explanation point that I think we needed.
I think the whole group flowed just so well, kind of like the high low finish, just put
Mm.
together. It was almost just like all the pieces were there, nothing was missing. You had your charisma, your in ring work, um, and together you guys were all stars. And at that time, probably took NXT to heights that it hadn't seen before, which is crazy to think. You guys came after your Samoa Joes and your Finn Balor's and your Nakamura's. But
Hmm.
without the Undisputed Era, Black and Gold wouldn't have been as revolutionary as it
Mm.
was.
It's kind of crazy to me to hear that coming from you at this point, because for me, I remember thinking, just contracts coming to an end, and then working for New Japan and Ring of Honor, and really not having WWE on my radar, but definitely having watched the takeovers that were the Nakamura's and the Kevin Steens and the Sammys, and being like, man, this is the place to be. And I feel like during those years, and it may be that way now, and I may just not have my finger on the pulse of it, the way I did then, but there was always some place that was like the underground, or maybe not even underground, but like the critically acclaimed place to be. And I think
Mm-hmm.
New Japan owned it at one point. I think Pro Wrestling Guerrilla owned the rights to that at one point
Yes.
too. And it was like, if you're going to see the best stuff. But I remember thinking to myself, watching one of those takeovers where Nakamura and Finn and Kevin, I think, were all in some way involved in the same takeover, and just thinking to myself, like, okay, this is that place, hands down. There is no, like, there's not even a conversation for it, let alone an argument. Like, there's just, you can't even dispute, no pun intended. You can't dispute, like, any part of that. And so then for us to come in after that, is just humbling as all hell. And then for somebody to make a comparison that our time there was the pinnacle, as opposed to, like, what was already awesome. It's pretty humbling, sir. So thank you very much.
Of course, just giving credit where credit's due.
Thank you, sir.
During your guys' time with NXT, the Undisputed Era did everything. Y'all were champions, Dusty Road Classic winners. Um, you really ran roughshod over the whole NXT roster. But what I found most captivating was the fact that during your time, you guys, in some sort of fashion, competed in all four WarGames matches.
Hmm.
Um, do you think that WarGames as a match was Undisputed Era's, match? And
Hmm.
what was your favorite out of the four that you competed in?
I think, so. I brought up before, the NWA, which would later become WCW, and the years that really captivated me as a fan. And I know that Hunter and Shawn Michaels, they were fans of that time frame and that era of wrestling as well. And man, I wore out the VHS copies of the War Games matches. And the War Games to me were, it was always the Horsemen, and then whoever the baby faces were, and it was generally Dusty. And like there's a year where Nikita was in there, there's a year where there's times where the Road Warriors were in there, and it just was, the common thread always seemed to be the, for lack of a better term, the a-holes. And the a-holes were the Horsemen, and
Mhm.
they were the guys that were always playing the numbers game, and but they were always like the upper echelon. And so to think all these years later, we would work for Triple H, who, like I said, I well, first off, I watched him growing up as a fan, but then secondly, I knew that he was a fan of some of the same stuff that I watched. Um, and to think that I'd be fortunate enough to work for WWE, period, for any amount of time, but then to also be put in a group by, um, someone that I watched growing up, and that group happened to be with three of my best friends in the industry, which is why I think that our chemistry on screen went so well, and why it was because it was real. There was nothing manufactured or forced about it. That's the four guys that you saw on NXT TV during the black and gold were like, that we would have been doing the same thing if we were sitting in Roddy's living room watching a UFC pay-per-view. Like that's just, we were four buddies who came up doing this together. And I think that's why it was what it was. And so I think the War Games match 100% was UE's. And I think it's just got like an interesting wrinkle to it that Roddy was on the opposing side in the first
Mhm.
one.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but yeah, those are the highlights of my career for sure. And I think your second question was my favorite one.
Yeah, what's your favorite?
Favorite would probably be number two.
Okay.
Um, I really, this is such a small thing, but I really loved the gear that we wore. We did the camo, and I just, I don't know, I really dug that. But also felt like, with one War Games under our belt, we were able to really tell a story in that second one. I felt like amongst everybody that was involved, everybody got their opportunity to be a part of the bigger story that we told. Um, and then just being in there with, obviously the boys were some of my best friends, Roddy, Kyle, and Adam. But then, I'd come up with a lot of the guys on the other side too, the Tomasos and the War Raiders. And, these are people that like we grew up Northeast Indies, crossing paths here and there, and, more times than not. And yeah, it was really cool to have that experience on the big stage, because nothing was bigger than those takeovers. Nothing. I mean, those were electric, and it was just the right amount of time, the right amount of sauce.
Yeah.
Too much sauce can ruin the burger, or whatever it is you're eating. And I think that sometimes these pay-per-views, they're just 5 hours. It's a little
A lot.
crazy. Yeah, yeah. These takeovers were perfect, man. They were 2.5 hours and seven matches, eight matches, and everybody had a story to tell, and everybody got a good amount of time. And you know, Triple H is, I mean, he is who he is for a reason. And he's fantastic at doing wrestling. Period. Let's just put it that way.
With that said, it's kind of a perfect transition into my next question. Now that Triple H and Sean are heads of creative for both the main roster and NXT, would you ever consider making a return to WWE, whether it's a talent or a wrestling perspective, or even in a coaching capacity?
I think with WWE, yeah, you're always open to it. It depends on what your experience there was, and mine was just all the way around positive. And I think a lot of that had to do with who we worked for, and that was directly Triple H. I never felt like I worked for, I really never felt like I worked for Vince. And I met
Okay.
Vince, and we would see him at some of the shows and some things that we did, but like NXT was Hunter's thing, and Sean was like his right hand man, and they were instrumental. I There were times I almost felt like I think Sean and Hunter might be in the Undisputed Era. Um, and so it's truly it's humbling that they took such an interest in us, A, as talents, but then B, as this group, and dare I say, I used to joke and call us Hunter's Horsemen, and I feel like that, and he would be able to answer this. I don't know what his vision for us was, but I feel like it had to have something to do with it.
Okay. A venture that maybe wrestling fans might not be aware that you've taken place in was a few years ago. You got to do a boxing exhibition match on
Mhm.
the Floyd Mayweather card.
Yeah.
How did that come about? And like, what was your experience like fighting in Dubai?
That kind of fell in my lap,
Okay.
and so like I'm a Muay Thai guy, and
Mhm.
I had four amateur kickboxing Muay Thai fights, so that would have been my preference. But when this kind of fell in my lap, I couldn't say no. Um, it was the Floyd Mayweather undercard. It wasn't something I had ever envisioned myself doing, but I just couldn't see any reason not to do it.
Mhm.
And I figured like, okay, this is not something on my deathbed that I'm gonna regret doing, but it is something on my deathbed that if I don't do it, I might regret. So the experience was incredible. It I just to get out there after all these years of being in pro wrestling, I had always kind of compared my athletic career and pro wrestling. I always thought they were very similar, and that for the first time in a long time competing like that, it reminded me of like, oh no, they're very, very different. And I think that that's one of the things that like I was missing a little bit in my wrestling career, was that single-mindedness of purpose, like your purpose in that fight helped me to realize the difference between pro wrestling and then athletics prior to that. And the difference being is that pro wrestling, what makes pro wrestling so hard is that you have to spin plates. You're spinning lots and lots of plates. So it's actually, I find it more difficult than if I'm going out there to compete, and whether that be a boxing match, kickboxing, Muay Thai, or well, kickboxing, Muay Thai are kind of the same thing. Um, but a football game, a lacrosse game, whatever it is, if I'm going to go compete, we've signed up with the agreement and the understanding that like you're going to try to hurt me, I'm going to try to hurt you. That's how you win. Um, and it's like you have a single-minded purpose. Like, when I played football, you might have had audibles and whatnot that you check down to if there was a tight end on your side or there wasn't, but you pretty much had one focus, and that was like to hit that ball carrier as hard as you could, and to not let anything stop you from getting to him. And it's kind of the same thing with fighting, whether it be boxing or kickboxing. I'm going to try to hurt you, you're going to try to hurt me. And there was something refreshing about doing that again after all these years. I enjoyed the process of training. I think we trained 9 or 10 weeks, my coach and I, for that fight, and then you go out and you you try to put into play all of the things that you worked on, and that process is just cool to me, and you don't really get that in pro wrestling, so it's different. Not one is neither one is better than the other, but they're just different.
Okay, so it's nice to get a change of pace, kind of.
It was. I mean, I had forgotten how good it felt to compete. Like, and truly, I say this, even if I went there and I lost, I just the chance to compete again was really all that was what really floated my boat, you know. And they flew my coach over with me, my agent and my wife. They flew my wife and I to Dubai. So my wife and I got to see a little bit of this country that we would have, I'm pretty sure, never seen otherwise. So it was, yeah, it was just a cool experience all the way around.
Amazing.
But getting a chance to, to fight, and then the bonus, the cherry on top was winning, because I didn't want to get my ass kicked in front of my wife. That's that's a tough one.
That'd have been a tough flight home for sure.
Yes, yeah, probably.
You know, we've talked about the Horsemen a lot, and
Mm,
in this like latest chapter of your career after joining MLW,
mm,
you've been a part of the Rogue Horsemen.
hmm.
Um, how did the stable between yourself, CW Anderson, Brock Anderson, and BRG come about? And what's it like having yourself and CW kind of take Brock and BRG under your wing, kind of?
It's a highlight that, like, I didn't bargain for. Like, I didn't realize that I would enjoy that process as much as I do.
Mhm.
Being able to kind of, to give back and to realize, like I had said before, there's some things that, it's not common knowledge. It just is to the people that have been doing it as long as we have. And so to and to be able to, Tony DeVito was an ECW guy. Steve Carino and I were good friends back in the day, and so to be around CW, who I had known, peripherally, but had known of more than known, and to really get to know Chris as a person. I really enjoy and appreciate his friendship, and then having a chance to be in the role that we're in when it comes to BRG and Brock is just so cool, because it's like we can kind of see where they're headed, and where they're going, and help, like, aid that, where we can do some of the heavy lifting if needed, but when they're ready to do the lifting, like, you know CW and I have been there and done that. Like, it'll be a pleasure to step back and let them, and that's cool.
You know, the Rogue Horsemen spent a good amount of 2024 battling the likes of Alex Kane. Going forward into 2025, what do you think are the goals for not only the Horsemen but for Bobby Fish?
I think as it pertains to MLW, like, I think the difference with the Horsemen is that we know we're what's best for business,
Mhm.
and the people that are making decisions there, they're dealing with, like, Contra and some of these entities that are, like, trying to destroy MLW. Like, they don't want to see, they're not what's best for business. They're kind of the anti, they're the opposite. And we catch flack for the means by which we do some things, but, like, we're just trying to make MLW, I'm going to steal a line from Donald Trump, but to make MLW great again. And if, in my humble opinion, if the powers that be would just back the hell up and let us do our work, like we will put MLW on in a place that it's never been before. So I think for 2025, yeah. When they first got us together, I was thinking, we want to cause some chaos, but at this point, I think there's enough chaos in MLW with some of the other groups, like I mentioned. And I think for us, it's more of a righteousness. Like we know we're what's best for business. And if you're not willing to acquiesce to that, well, then we have to show you. And I think 2025 is going to be the year that we show everybody that we are what's best for business.
Okay. I have one more question for you. We've talked in abundance about Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, Roderick Strong. Recently, they've come together to reform the Undisputed Kingdom, along with Mike Bennett, and Matt Taven.
Mm-hmm.
Would you ever consider going back to AEW and being a part of the Undisputed Kingdom?
At the end of the day, it's pro wrestling, so you truly never say never, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy doing the things that I'm doing, but at the end of the day, man, money talks. Like it's bills got to be paid, and I have a wife and family, so and I like I said before, like I don't plan on doing this forever. I know I'm more towards the end of my career than the beginning. I don't see necessarily the end in sight because I feel so damn good. Um, Props to DDP Yoga. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, we'll see what happens.
Okay. Um, Before we go, is there any social medias or anything you want to let the fans know where they can find you at for all your latest happenings?
Yes, sir. The Bobby Fish on Instagram and on Twitter,
Okay.
or X, whatever they're calling it at this point. BobbyFishApparel.com. That's where all the merchandise is, and then obviously MLW. Go on there. There's a pretty cool Rogue Horseman shirt that was released, and everybody should have one.
That's good. Bobby, I just want to say thank you a million times over. This was undisputedly one of my favorite episodes so far, and I would be looking forward to possibly having you on again.
Well, you let me know, sir, and I will be here.
Sounds good. I will leave this then, I guess, at see you next time, Bobby.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Appreciate.